Hello everybody, gnbryl here again, and here is another installment, another conversation on perfect pitch. Okay, the thing to take from the last video was that perfect pitch is like going from two-dimensional hearing to three-dimensional hearing. Kind of like in the visual field, we can go from a 2D image, a flat image, to a 3D stereograph. And by the way, make sure you do that exercise with that stereograph that I put in the last video. And make sure you can see all three sea creatures at the bottom. You know, I think it was a fish, a turtle, and a squid. And that's how you know, that's how you will know that you are viewing it properly. Make sure you do that exercise. Okay, another thing to take from the last video is that when you hear with perfect pitch, all the sounds feel like they penetrate your mind a lot deeper. They feel a lot more intrusive. The best analogy that I can give is like sometimes you will be walking down the street and somebody, you know, a biker passes by, like a Harley Davidson. It is just so loud that it kind of cuts your mind like a knife. And it's somewhat similar with perfect pitch, except it's not as, you know, uncomfortable, but it is kind of intrusive, or at least you have control over how deeply you can let the sounds into your mind. You kind of, this is what I meant by squeezing the notes. You kind of develop that ability to flex your perfect pitch muscle, if you will. Okay, and finally, another point to remember is that naming notes at this point should be very low on your priority list. You really don't have much to remember the notes by at this point. So don't worry about naming notes. Focus on what you feel inside your head and how you are processing sounds. Focus on that for now. Okay, so today I would like to talk about the two main components of perfect pitch. I mean, there is a reason that it's not easy to develop in adults, and that is because of these two components that you need to have. The first one is, you know, you should be very familiar with it by now. The first one is perception. This additional sensation in the brain, this additional layer in your hearing of any sound whatsoever. You have this additional layer of hearing, or, you know, additional sensation that comes on top of it. So it's an additional perception that you have. That's the first component. And it can be in a very weak and rudimentary form, but it has to be there to not waste your time on, you know, on years of naming notes and stuff. Like, for instance, where I live, we have a lot of small planes passing by, and I've noticed that most of them sound between E and F sharp. And so my guess is that most of those planes, the engines rotate at about the same RPMs, and it happens to produce a pitch around, you know, between E and F sharp, whatever. And so as an idea, you know, you can probably, if you're a pilot with perfect pitch, you would spontaneously notice that your engine, you know, something is wrong with it, because it's not, all of a sudden today, it's not making the same pitch that you're used to. It's not an F anymore today, but it's, you know, something else, maybe a C sharp. So anyway, that's an idea for a perfect pitch application for you. All right, so the two main components are, number one, expanded perception, and number two, the ability of your brain to interpret that perception independent of your short-term memory. So what that means practically is that if you hear some music going on, or, you know, you've heard a chord, for instance, you have a certain sound lingering in your short-term memory. And so once your brain, you know, hears additional sounds as you go along, it will not lose that perfect pitch sensation, even in the face of intervening music or, you know, any other intervening sound. So the way I would like to describe it is that your short-term memory has some content, and that content does not affect your brain's ability to interpret the perfect pitch sensation. The sensation is clear enough to the brain that it can still sort it out even in spite of all the short-term memory stuff. And this second component is going to be like 80% of your perfect pitch training, because that's where you're reprogramming the way you've been hearing music, since birth. You basically, it's like a knee-jerk automatic response that you hear sounds and you just process them in terms of how they are related to each other, what's the musical idea, stuff like that. But you're going to have to learn to sort that out from your perfect pitch sensation, so that in practice, if you are just listening to music, you're not gonna be like squeezing every note. I mean, you're not gonna have enough time to squeeze every note as they go by to determine its shape and to determine what the note is. But if you want to focus on any particular note, you can do that, and then you can tell, oh, okay, so that's that, so that's like a high E or whatever, or like, oh, okay, that's the tonic, so it seems like this song is in the key of B. Okay, well, good deal. And so in the next video, I am going to talk about how to get these two components, what to do to start acquiring this additional layer of hearing, and then what to do to make sure that you can interpret that additional sensation or layer in spite of what's in your short-term memory, in spite of what you're actually listening to and what kind of sounds are going by. So that's going to be for next time. But for now, I am going to give you something to do. Now remember, the three-note chord naming, and then you can do like this. You play a chord and then you go, and you can see, maybe you can identify the notes just by playing them separately. For instance, let's say you got the middle tone is a D. Okay, you're like, all right, so this is a D as well, because that's an octave. And then this one, it must be an A flat. So you go, okay, it's an A flat, D, and D. Maybe you can identify the notes like that. But maybe you can't, it doesn't matter. If you can't, then you just play, three notes like this, and you try to see if you can sing them. You play them several times and you sing them. Na, na, na. And that is enough for now. But you've already been doing that. So the next thing to do is this. In the Western scale, the notes are a half step apart. So what you can do, it's a very useful exercise. Again, it's a preparatory exercise. Maybe you will start developing perfect pitch perception as a byproduct of it. But the main point here is to really just kind of warm yourself up to actual perfect pitch training. So what you can do is you play any two notes a half step apart, like this. And then you sing them. Na, na. And you make sure that you sing them correctly. Na, na. And then you take the top note and you play it in a different octave and another note a half step off or a half step down, like this. And you sing them. Na, na. So I played a C and C sharp and sang them. Na, na. Then I played a C sharp and D. Na, na. Then I'm playing D and E flat. Na, na. And then you play E flat and E. Na, na. Na, na. Na, na. That was E and F. And then na, na. F and F sharp. And you can do the same thing down. You know, let's say you play, again, B and C, let's say. Na, na. And then you go down. Na, na. B flat B. And then you go B flat A. La, la. Now, I still prefer to sing them from the bottom up. You can sing them, you know, from the top down. Na, na. But I think it's just more orderly in your mind if you sing them from the bottom up. So you can move down, but sing them from the bottom up. So then the next one would be A flat A. Na, na. And then na, na. So the objective is to play a minor second and then sing it. And you go like this. Or like this, you know. C, C sharp, D, D, E flat, E, F, and so forth. But changing the octave every time. Okay, and this second component of perfect pitch, you know, this interplay between the perfect pitch sensation and the short-term memory content, that is the reason why perfect pitch does not develop spontaneously if you miss your, you know, brain plasticity period during childhood. And also it brings up a point that that's actually the reason why perfect pitch training in adults happens relatively slowly, and the progress is similar to learning an instrument. For instance, let's say you want to become a guitarist, and you tell yourself, okay, today is whatever, you know, December 7th, and by December 7th next year, I'm going to become a guitarist. Is that a realistic goal? Probably not. I mean, to become a guitarist, you have to play so many different pieces. You have to learn so many different songs, and it's not going to be a particular date that you're going to be able to step up and say, okay, now I'm a guitarist, you know, or a pianist, whatever. It's just not realistic to say, okay, let's pick a date a couple of months from now, and by then I'm going to become a pianist. You know, that's not a realistic goal. But if you want to say that I am going to play guitar a lot more, you know, a year from now, you know, that's a more realistic goal. Or even if you say I'm going to become a guitarist by December 7, you know, 2 or 3 years from now, that's probably a realistic goal as well. So I've already covered this, but I just wanted to make a point again that perfect pitch progress is very slow. It's kind of like, you know, I mentioned it's like a new baby learning to crawl. You're not going to pinpoint the day that the baby is crawling, because the baby is going to be struggling. And then one day you're like, oh, he's actually crawling now, but I didn't notice it until today. So that's the same with perfect pitch. You don't necessarily notice progress in some discrete stages, but one day you go, oh, dang, this perception, this new layer, it doesn't go away anymore. It's like, it's always there now. Wow. Because you see, learning perfect pitch is like going up a down escalator. You do your exercises and you're trying to develop it and you're focusing on that. It's like you're climbing up a down escalator, and then you go to bed at night and you don't hear any sounds, you're just asleep, and then it takes you back down. And then the next day you wake up and you backtracked a little bit. So you start your exercises again, and it takes you a little bit to even get to that same level again. It's actually the same with babies when they learn to crawl. First they have to, like the next day, get to where they were the day before, and then they can make progress. So it's similar to this. And then eventually you reach a stage that all this stuff gets so ingrained in your brain that you notice, I've actually acquired something. It's actually stable now. It becomes established in your mind's ear.